I'm Jasmine Carter, 35, a crisis communications strategist in Washington, D.C. for years. I was the silent right hand of Richard Sterling, a powerful attorney consumed by his obsession with reputation and control. When a catastrophic data leak threatened to destroy the firm, it was my plan that saved everything, managing the narrative, sealing every legal crack. But Richard Sterling, a man who lives and breathes for glory, stole the credit and tossed me aside like I was nothing. He thought I would disappear quietly. That was his fatal mistake. I built him up as a hero only to watch the day he falls into disgrace. I will strip away the reputation he worships, shatter the career he betrayed me to protect. And when the last light of his spotlight burns out, all that will remain of Richard Sterling is a traitor crushed beneath my hand. The phone vibrated against the polished mahogany of my nightstand with the specific, jarring buzz I'd assigned to only one number, the office emergency line. It was 2:17 a.m. Calls at this hour were never about celebrating a win. They were about triage. They were my entire job in a single, gut-wrenching sound. My name is Jasmine Carter, but in the circles that mattered in Washington, D.C., I was known as Jazz. At 35, I was the person the powerful called when their worlds were on fire. My job was to walk into the inferno and lead them out, preferably with their reputations only slightly singed. I swung my legs out of bed, my mind already shedding the fog of sleep and clicking into crisis mode. "Carter," I answered, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline already beginning to course through me. "Jazz, it's Richard. Get to the office. Now, code red." Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Vance and Associates, the most influential lobbying and law firm inside the Beltway. A man whose ambition was matched only by his profound inability to see threats until they were already kicking down his door. Code Red was his invention, a dramatic flair for a situation that had gone from bad to catastrophic. This was the first time he'd ever used it. "On my way," I said, and the line went dead. 20 minutes later, I walked into the glass-walled conference room on the top floor, a sterile space we ironically called the war room. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and rising panic. Richard was pacing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, his Savile Row suit already looking rumpled. His face, usually tanned and confident for the cameras, was pale. Arthur Vance, our head of IT, sat hunched over a laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He was a brilliant, anxious man who had been warning Richard about our cybersecurity vulnerabilities for years. Tonight, his face was ashen with the grim satisfaction of being proven right in the worst possible way. Lena Petrova, our razor-sharp general counsel, was on the phone, speaking in the low, urgent tones of someone trying to stop an avalanche with a legal brief. She met my eyes as I walked in and gave me a nearly imperceptible shake of her head. It was bad. Elias Vance, the firm's co-founder and senior partner, the steady hand that usually guided us, sat at the head of the table. At 70, he was the firm's conscience, its history. Tonight, he just looked tired, watching Richard's frantic pacing with an expression of deep disappointment. "Talk to me, Arthur," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. I placed my tablet on the table and looked directly at the man who held the digital keys to our kingdom. Arthur flinched. "It's a full breach, Jazz. They're in. They've been in for at least 72 hours. The data exfiltration is extensive." "Define extensive," I pressed, keeping my tone even. "Panic is a contagion. My job is to be the cure." "Everything," he whispered, finally looking up from his screen. His eyes were wide with terror. "Client files, internal communications, financial records, the Thompson files, all of it." The room went cold. The Thompson files. Senator Thompson was our biggest client, a man whose political career was built on a carefully constructed image that we, Sterling Vance, had spent millions to maintain. His files were a roadmap of every skeleton in his closet. If they got out, he was finished, and so were we. Richard stopped pacing and slammed his hand on the table. How the hell did this happen? I approved a budget increase for you last year, Arthur. Heads will roll for this. I want a name." It was a classic Richard move. Find a scapegoat before you even understand the problem. "It's not that simple, Richard," Arthur said, his voice trembling slightly. "This wasn't a brute force attack. It was sophisticated. They used a zero-day exploit in the third-party software we use for." I held up a hand. "We can do the post-mortem later. Right now, we have one job, containment. Have you shut down the access point?" "Yes, we've isolated the servers, but the data is already gone. It's out there." Lena hung up her phone. "The FBI's cybercrime division has been notified. They're on their way. Legally, we're also required to begin client notification within 24 hours. Richard's head snapped toward her. 24 hours, we'll be crucified, the press will have a field day, our stock will plummet, we need to control the narrative first. The narrative, Elias Vance said, his voice a low rumble, is that we failed. We failed to protect the people who trusted us with their most sensitive information. No amount of spin can change that fundamental truth, Richard. With all due respect, Elias, Richard shot back, his bravado returning, that's exactly what I pay Jazz for, to change the truth. Or at least to frame it in a way that doesn't destroy 40 years of work. So Jazz, what's the play? How do we spin this? All eyes turned to me. They saw a problem. I saw a chessboard. Richard, a blustering king, exposed and vulnerable. Arthur, a pawn, about to be sacrificed. Lena and Elias, rooks, powerful but limited in their movement. And the enemy, a faceless player who had just put us in check. I took a slow breath, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat longer. There is no spin, I said calmly. Richard's face contorted. What? That's not an option, that's why you're here. There is no spin, I repeated, looking at each of them in turn. There is only a strategy, a two-phase strategy, and it has to be executed perfectly or everything Elias built, everything we are, will be gone by the end of the week. I let that sink in. I could see the gears turning in Richard's head. He loved the sound of a grand strategy, something he could present to the board as his own. Go on, he said, gesturing for me to continue. Before I could speak, my own phone buzzed. It was a news alert from a major media outlet. My stomach clenched. I knew what it was before I even read the headline. I turned my phone around so they could all see it. Sterling Vance, DC power broker, suffers massive data breach. Senators, lobbyists, corporate secrets exposed. Someone, the hackers most likely, hadn't just stolen the data. They had already announced it to the world. Arthur let out a soft groan. Lena closed her eyes. Richard's face went from pale to a ghastly shade of gray. Oh my God, he breathed. The clock had just run out. My 24-hour notification window had just become 0. The crisis was no longer a fire in our building. It was a wildfire, and the wind had just picked up. Phase 1, I said, my voice cutting through their shock like a surgeon's scalpel, begins right now. I looked directly at Richard, my expression unreadable. And it will require something you've never been comfortable with, Richard, humility. I knew in that moment that he would listen. He would follow my script because he was desperate. And he would, when the time was right, take all the credit for it. That was part of the plan. He was so focused on surviving the next news cycle that he would never see the second move coming. The move that wasn't just about saving the company, it was about cleaning it. Humility? Richard scoffed, the word sounding foreign and distasteful in his mouth. Jazz, our clients don't pay us for humility. They pay us for strength, for control. And we've just demonstrated we have control over nothing, I countered, my gaze unwavering. The public narrative is already set. We are victims, yes, but we are also incompetent. The only way to reshape that narrative is to seize it. We have to get ahead of the story, not by denying it, but by owning it, completely. I walked over to the large monitor on the wall and plugged in my tablet. A blank document appeared. Phase 1 is radical transparency and contrition. It's aggressive, it's public, and it's immediate. Lena leaned forward, intrigued. What do you have in mind, Jazz? First, a press conference. Not a written statement, not an email. A live press conference this morning at 9 a.m. sharp. Richard paled even further. 9 a.m., that's in less than 7 hours. With what statement? What do we say? We say we failed, I said, typing the words onto the screen. We don't use weasel words like an incident occurred. We say, we were the target of a sophisticated criminal attack and our defenses were not strong enough. We failed to protect our clients' data, and for that, we are profoundly sorry. We take the hit, full force. Elias Vance nodded slowly. That's honest. I can live with honest. But it's not enough, I continued. Actions are what matter. So second, we announced that Sterling Vance will be providing, at our own expense, a lifetime subscription to a top-tier credit monitoring and identity theft protection service for every single client and employee affected, past and present. Arthur's head shot up. Jazz, the cost of that would be astronomical. We're talking millions, tens of millions potentially. It's cheaper than bankruptcy, I shot back. It's a tangible, costly apology. It shows we're putting our money where our mouth is. Richard was starting to see the logic. The fear in his eyes was slowly being replaced by calculation. He could frame this as decisive leadership. Okay, I like that. What's next? Third, and this is the most critical part, I said, pausing for effect. We announce that you, Richard, as CEO, are taking full personal responsibility. And to demonstrate that, we are immediately commissioning a full, independent, third-party investigation into this breach. No stone unturned. We will give them unfettered access to everything and everyone, from the mailroom to the boardroom. And we will make the findings of that investigation public. A heavy silence fell over the room. Lena's pen stopped moving. Elias looked at me with a new level of respect. Richard, however, looked like I just asked him to jump out of the window. Public? Are you insane? He hissed. They'll find every little mistake, every budget cut, every corner we ever. He stopped himself, catching Arthur's pointed stare. That's the point, Richard, I said softly. Trust is a currency. Right now, our account is overdrawn. The only way to rebuild it is to show the world we have nothing left to hide. We have to be the ones demanding answers, louder than the press, louder than Congress. We have to become the architects of our own crucifixion, because if we control the process, we can influence the outcome. She's right, Richard, Elias said, his voice firm. It's a bold move, a painful one, but it's the only move we have. For the next 4 hours, we worked. I drafted the public statement, choosing every word with surgical precision. Lena and her team began the nightmare process of compiling a list of affected clients for notification. Arthur worked with the arriving FBI agents, providing them with server logs and data packets. Elias made quiet calls to key board members, preparing them for the financial shockwave. And Richard? I coached him. I drilled him. I wrote his speech and then made him rehearse it until the words sounded like his own, until the feigned humility looked almost genuine. Look into the camera, Richard. I instructed him in the empty boardroom we were using for practice. Don't look at the reporters. You're not talking to them. You're talking to Senator Thompson. You're talking to the CEO of OmniCorp. You're talking to every single person who is currently on the phone with their lawyer asking how to sue us into oblivion. You need them to see that you are taking this as a personal failure. It wasn't my personal failure, he grumbled, wiping sweat from his brow. It was Arthur. He told me a month ago that we needed to upgrade the firewall protocols, that it would cost $250,000. I told him we'd table it until the next quarter's budget review. How was I supposed to know? He trailed off, realizing what he'd just admitted. I stared at him, my face a perfect mask of professional neutrality. But inside, a small, cold piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This was it. The negligence. The direct line of accountability he was so desperate to avoid. He had been warned. Forget that now, Richard, I said, my voice smooth as ice. None of that matters today. Today you are the captain of the ship, and the ship has hit an iceberg. You don't blame the navigator. You take command. Now from the top. My name is Richard Sterling. At 9 a.m., he walked to the podium in the firm's lobby, an army of cameras and reporters waiting for him. He looked pale but composed. He delivered the speech flawlessly. He announced the credit monitoring. He took responsibility. And then the master stroke I had prepared. And that is why, effective immediately, he said, his voice ringing with conviction, I have ordered a complete, top-to-bottom, independent investigation to be led by a former U.S. attorney to find out exactly what went wrong and who is responsible. We will be transparent, we will be accountable, and we will accept the consequences, whatever they may be. The room erupted with questions, but Richard, following my instructions, simply said, "Thank you," and walked away from the podium, leaving them hungry for more. Back in the war room, we watched the news coverage. It was brutal, but it was exactly what I had predicted. The headlines were no longer just about the breach. They were about Richard Sterling's unprecedented and courageous response. He was being praised for his transparency, for taking ownership. Phase 1 was a success. We hadn't stopped the bleeding, but we had applied a tourniquet. Richard was beaming, the exhaustion and fear of the early morning replaced with a triumphant glow. Jazz, you're a miracle worker, a goddamn genius. Architects of our own crucifixion. I love it. The board is calling me a hero. It's just the first step, Richard, I cautioned, keeping my expression neutral. Nonsense. It's the most important step. We've weathered the storm. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be appreciative but felt proprietary. Now, for the cleanup, the investigation will need a liaison, someone to manage the information flow. I want you to handle it. You know what they can and can't see. Keep them focused on the IT department. Arthur made his bed, he can lie in it. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. He was already planning the cover-up, positioning me as the gatekeeper who would steer the independent investigation toward his chosen scapegoat. He saw me as his accomplice. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was a private number. Jasmine Carter speaking. Ms. Carter, my name is Marcus Thorne. I'm a partner at Thorne & Associates. I was very impressed with your handling of the press conference this morning. Very impressive indeed. Thorne and Associates was our biggest rival, a leaner, more aggressive firm that had been stealing clients from us for the past 2 years. Thank you, Mr. Thorne, I said guardedly. I'll be direct, he said. I know what a sinking ship looks like, and I know a good captain when I see one. When you're ready to abandon ship, my door is always open. I gave a non-committal reply and ended the call, but it planted a seed. Others were watching. They saw the truth behind the performance. The day ended with an email from Richard to the entire staff. It praised the team for their resilience and announced a new internal task force to support the independent investigation. He named me as its head. It was a promotion on paper. In reality, it was a gilded cage. He had just made me the public face of the cover-up he was planning. He thought he had me trapped, that my ambition would make me complicit. He thought he had won. He had no idea that Phase 2 had already begun. And I was the only one who knew the rules. The next 2 weeks were a blur of controlled chaos. The independent investigator, a formidable former U.S. attorney named Maria Flores, arrived with her team of forensic accountants and cybersecurity experts. She was sharp, methodical, and had an uncanny ability to smell bullshit from a mile away. My new role as Richard's designated liaison put me directly in her path, a position that was both perilous and precisely what my strategy required. Richard's instructions were clear. Give her what she needs, Jazz, but not what she wants. Drown her in data. Server logs, personnel files from the IT department, anything that points to Arthur. Make it look like we're cooperating fully while you build a narrative. Arthur's negligence is the story. Stick to it. I'd sit in meetings with him and my task force, which consisted of me, Lena Petrova, and a junior partner named Ben Carter, no relation, who was fiercely loyal to Richard. Lena, with her keen legal mind, was an invaluable ally. She understood the line between protecting the firm and obstructing justice. Ben, on the other hand, was a mouthpiece. So, we've collated the email chains from Arthur, Ben would say, his tone full of false gravity. It's clear he was warned about the necessary software patches for months. He dropped the ball. It's a tragic case of incompetence. That's the angle, Richard would confirm, nodding approvingly. We emphasize that management can't be expected to micromanage every technical detail. We trusted our expert, and he failed us. Jazz, make sure Flora sees those emails first thing tomorrow. I would nod, my face a mask of compliance. Of course, Richard. I'll package them for her. But my real work started after they all went home. In the quiet of my office, surrounded by glowing monitors, I was playing a different game. My strategy wasn't about building a single narrative for Arthur's incompetence. It was about laying down 2 parallel tracks of evidence. Track 1 was the one Richard wanted. I meticulously compiled every piece of data that pointed to Arthur. The uninstalled patches, the missed deadlines for system upgrades, even an internal performance review from 6 months prior where he'd been flagged for being overstretched. I handed it all over to Flores, presenting it as the primary evidence trail. I was the perfect, helpful liaison. Track 2 was invisible to Richard. It was the truth. It was the email I'd found buried in a server archive from Arthur to Richard, dated 4 weeks before the breach. The subject line was stark. Urgent, critical vulnerability and funding request. In it, Arthur didn't just request the $250,000 upgrade. He explicitly stated, without this firewall enhancement, we are exposed to the exact type of zero-day exploit that has hit our competitors. I cannot guarantee the security of our client data beyond the next 60 days. Then came Richard's reply, a single damning sentence. Arthur, the partners are not in the mood for your alarmist budget requests. Make do with what you have. We'll revisit this in Q4. He hadn't just tabled the request. He had ignored a direct, written warning that predicted the exact nature of the breach. This was not negligence from a distance. It was a conscious, cost-saving decision that had directly led to the catastrophe. This email was the silver bullet. But I couldn't just hand it to Flores. If I did, Richard would know I'd betrayed him. He would fire me, discredit me, and paint me as a disgruntled employee. The board, desperate to protect the firm's founder, might even believe him. I needed the investigation to find the email on its own. I had to lead them to the water without letting them see my hand. My days became a delicate dance. I would spend mornings in tense meetings with Flores and her team. Miss Carter, Flores said one afternoon, her eyes boring into me from across the conference table, we've reviewed the documentation you provided on Mr. Vance's IT department. It's thorough, but it feels curated. I assure you, Ms. Flores, you have everything we've found relevant to the breach, I replied smoothly, meeting her gaze. Relevance is my determination to make, not yours, she said, a sharp edge to her voice. I want full, unmediated access to your executive server archives. All of them unfiltered. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Ben Carter, sitting beside me, started to protest. That's an overreach. Executive communications are privileged. No, I interrupted, my voice firm. The single word silenced Ben and made Flores raise an eyebrow. She's right. Our commitment was to full transparency. You'll have access. Richard was furious when he heard. Are you out of your mind? Do you know what's in those archives? My negotiation notes, partner disputes. It's a goddamn minefield. It's a minefield we have to let her walk through, I argued, my voice calm and steady. If we resist now, after your big speech about transparency, we look like we have something to hide. It will undo all the goodwill we've built. Trust me, Richard. I can manage her. I'll set the search parameters in a way that keeps her focused on cybersecurity keywords. She'll be so buried in technical jargon she won't have time to look for anything else. He hated it, but he was trapped by his own public promises. He reluctantly agreed. Fine, but you better not let this blow up in my face, Jazz. Your career is on the line here. I understand completely, I said, and I did. That night, I didn't go home. I logged into the system as an administrator, preparing the data archive for Flores's team, and I did something very simple. I took the file containing the damning email exchange between Arthur and Richard, and I corrupted its timestamp, making it appear as if it had been created a year earlier than it was. Then, I buried it deep within a folder of budget proposals from the previous fiscal year, a place no one would look for a recent, urgent security warning. It was a needle in a digital haystack, but I left a clue. A single breadcrumb. In Arthur's performance review, part of the track 1, evidence I had already provided, I knew there was a footnote. It referred to an unapproved Q3 funding proposal that had impacted his department's performance. The reference number was hyperlinked in the original document. I made sure the version Flores had contained that active link. It was a gamble, a huge one. I was betting that Flores was as meticulous as her reputation suggested. I was betting that someone on her team, a junior analyst perhaps, would be curious enough to click that link while cross-referencing documents. The link would lead them not to a simple proposal, but to the entire archived folder of old budget requests. And there, if they were thorough enough to scan the contents, they would find a file with a corrupted timestamp and a very, very interesting subject line. They would find the silver bullet, and they would believe they had found it all on their own. A week later, Lena called me into her office and closed the door. Her face was grim. Jazz, what have you done? She asked, her voice low. I'm not sure what you mean, Lena. Don't play games with me, she said, her eyes flashing. Flores's team just requested a private interview with Arthur Vance, and they specifically subpoenaed the unredacted Q3 budget archives. They're no longer focused on just the IT department. They're looking upstairs. They're looking at Richard. I kept my expression neutral, but my heart was pounding. The breadcrumb had been found. As I said, Lena, our commitment is to transparency. We have to follow the evidence wherever it leads. She studied my face for a long moment, a silent conversation passing between us. Lena was brilliant. She couldn't see my exact moves, but she could see the shape of the game on the board. She saw that I wasn't just defending the firm. I was orchestrating something. Be careful, Jazz, she said finally, her tone a clear warning. Richard is a cornered animal. Don't underestimate how vicious he can be when he feels threatened. I'm not, I said, but he's underestimated me, and that's a mistake. As I walked back to my office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was just a single sentence. Heard you're making waves. My offer still stands. MT Marcus Thorne. He was watching, waiting. The sharks were circling. The pressure was building. Phase 2 was now in motion, and it was completely out of my hands. All I could do was wait for the explosion. And it came sooner than I expected. The explosion came in the form of a summons. Maria Flores requested Richard's presence for a formal interview. It wasn't a friendly chat. It was a deposition, complete with a court reporter and Lena present as the firm's counsel. The request itself was a tectonic shift in the investigation. They weren't just asking questions anymore, they were building a case. The atmosphere in the executive wing turned toxic overnight. The controlled confidence of Phase 1 evaporated, replaced by a paranoid, biting tension. Richard was a storm cloud in a tailored suit, stalking the halls, his voice a low growl in every meeting. He saw betrayal in every shadow. Who the hell clicked that link? he demanded in a closed-door meeting with me and Ben Carter. Lena was pointedly not invited. This is your fault, Jazz. You were supposed to manage them. You were supposed to keep them contained in it. They are an independent body, Richard, I said calmly, my hands folded on the table. My job is to facilitate their investigation, not obstruct it. Obstructing a former U.S. attorney is a felony. We agreed on this path. I agreed to a performance, he snarled, jabbing a finger in my direction. A piece of theater to calm the markets. I didn't agree to let them put a noose around my neck. Ben Carter, ever the sycophant, jumped in. Jazz, maybe you were too cooperative. Richard's right, you should have put up more of a fight, cited executive privilege, and that would have been a red flag the size of Texas. I cut him off, my voice turning sharp. It would have confirmed we had something to hide. This is the blowback from our own strategy. We have to ride it out. Ride it out? Richard laughed, a harsh, grating sound. They're going to ask me about that email from Arthur. They're going to ask me why I ignored a direct warning. What am I supposed to say? This was the moment he would reveal his true character. Would he finally take the responsibility he had so publicly claimed? You tell them the truth, I said, looking him straight in the eye. You say it was a judgment call, a calculated business risk that in hindsight was a catastrophic mistake. You say you were balancing a dozen competing budget priorities and you made the wrong call. You take the hit. It will be damaging, but it's survivable. A CEO who made a mistake is better than a CEO who lies. He stared at me, his eyes narrowing. He was searching for an angle, a way out that didn't involve him admitting any fault. No, he said finally, a cold certainty in his voice. That's not how we're playing this. We're going on the offensive. He turned to Ben. Get our opposition research team digging into Maria Flores. I want to know everything. Every case she ever lost, every ruling that was ever appealed, every disgruntled former colleague. We're going to discredit the investigator. Then he turned back to me. And you're going to find a way to discredit that email. Say it was fabricated. Say Arthur doctored the timestamp after the fact to cover his own ass. Whatever it takes. Find a narrative and make it stick. I felt a profound sense of clarity. He wasn't just negligent, he was corrupt. He was willing to destroy a good man's career and obstruct a federal investigation to save himself. My gamble hadn't just been about exposing a mistake, it was about exposing a rot at the very core of the firm. That would be a lie, Richard, I said, my voice quiet but firm. And I won't do it. The silence in the room was absolute. Ben Carter looked like he'd seen a ghost. Richard's face, which had been flushed with anger, slowly drained of color. His expression hardened into something I had never seen before, pure, unadulterated venom. What did you just say to me? He asked, his voice dangerously low. I said I won't lie for you, I repeated, standing up. My job is to manage the crisis for Sterling Vance, not to help you commit a crime. If you go down this path, you will destroy this firm, and I won't be a part of it. He stared at me for a long, terrible moment. Then a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. You're fired, Jazz, he said, savoring the words. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Your access is already being revoked. You're done. He expected me to beg, to crumble. He expected me to be terrified of losing the career I had worked so hard to build. But as I stood there, I felt something else entirely. Relief. You can't fire me, Richard, I said with a calm I didn't know I possessed. Oh, I can, and I just did, he sneered. No, I said, picking up my tablet from the table. Because this morning, before coming into this meeting, I tendered my resignation to Elias Vance and the board of directors. My last official day is in 2 weeks. Until then, I'm still an employee. And if you try to have me escorted out, I'll make a call to Maria Flores and tell her you're firing the liaison to her investigation in a blatant attempt to obstruct justice. How do you think that will look? Ben's jaw was on the floor. Richard was speechless, caught completely off guard. He had thought he was setting a trap, but I had already disarmed it. Get out of my office, he finally managed to say, his voice a choked whisper. I walked out, my head held high, my heart pounding a triumphant rhythm against my ribs. I passed Lena in the hallway. She looked at me, her eyes full of questions. I gave her a small, tight smile. Phase 2 is complete, I said under my breath. She understood. The news of my resignation spread through the firm like wildfire. The official story was that I was leaving to pursue other opportunities, but everyone knew. I had defied Richard, and my time was up. My allies grew quiet, afraid to be associated with me. People I'd worked with for years avoided my gaze in the hallway. I was an outcast. The call from Marcus Thorne came that evening. I heard the news, he said without preamble. My offer, double your current salary, a partnership stake, and full autonomy to build your own crisis management division. What do you say? I'll think about it, Marcus, I said, my mind racing. Things are complicated right now. I know, he said. I also know that Flores is scheduled to present her preliminary findings to your board in 1 week. And I know Richard Sterling is a man who would rather burn his house down than let someone else live in it. Be careful, Jazz. The game isn't over yet. He was right. Richard wasn't just going to let me walk away. He was going to try and destroy me on my way out. The next day, the attack began. An anonymous leak appeared in a notorious DC gossip blog. It painted me as a reckless, overly ambitious operator who had bungled the crisis response and was being forced out. It hinted that I was the one who had tried to frame Arthur Vance to cover my own mistakes. It was character assassination, pure and simple. It was Richard's clumsy attempt to poison the well, to ensure that wherever I landed next, I would arrive damaged. It was a vicious move. It was also a fatal error. He thought he was punching down at a disgraced employee. He didn't realize he was punching up at the one person who knew exactly how his carefully constructed world was about to end. He had made it personal. Now, so would I opened my laptop and began composing an email to a single recipient, Elias Vance. The subject line was simple: checkmate. My email to Elias Vance was brief and direct. It contained no accusations, no emotional appeals. It contained only a single, encrypted attachment and a sentence: Elias, for your eyes only. I believe you'll find this clarifies the firm's position. Jazz. The attachment was my own silver bullet, something I had held in reserve, a piece of the puzzle I had never intended to use unless absolutely necessary. It was a screen recording I had made from my own laptop during a video conference call 2 months before the breach. The call had been with Richard, Arthur, and our chief financial officer. The topic was the Q3 budget. In the recording, Arthur's face is earnest and worried. Richard, I have to insist, he says, his voice clear as a bell. The cybersecurity upgrade isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. We are dangerously exposed. Richard's response, captured in perfect high definition, is dismissive and laced with condescension. Listen, Arthur, he says, leaning into his camera, your job is to manage the tech we have, not to constantly ask for shiny new toys. I have a partner's retreat in Aspen to pay for. Find the money in your existing budget or drop it. We are not spending $250,000 chasing digital ghosts. He hadn't just put his denial in an email. He had said it on camera in a meeting with witnesses. He had prioritized a luxury retreat over the fundamental security of the firm. It was irrefutable. It was devastating. And now, it was in the hands of the one man who could use it to save the company from its own CEO. I didn't hear back from Elias for 24 hours. It was the longest day of my life. I packed up my office, the photos of my family, the awards I'd won for campaigns I'd run. I deleted personal files from my computer. I was a ghost in a machine that was already trying to forget me. Ben Carter walked past my open door without a glance. Colleagues whispered when I entered the break room. The blog post had done its job. I was toxic. The next afternoon, Elias' assistant appeared at my door. Mr. Vance would like to see you in his office, she said, her expression unreadable. Elias' office was a sanctuary of old-world Power Euros, dark wood, leather-bound books, and the faint scent of cigars smoked long ago. He was standing by the window, looking out over the monuments of Washington, D.C. He didn't turn when I entered. You've been playing a very dangerous game, Jasmine, he said, his voice quiet. I've been playing the only game available to me, Elias, I replied, standing my ground. One that Richard started. He turned then, his eyes, usually kind, were now sharp and weary. He held a tablet in his hand. My video was paused on the screen. I watched this 3 times. I then had a long conversation with Arthur Vance. He confirmed everything. I know he did. Richard is a fool, Elias said, a deep sadness in his voice. He's arrogant, reckless. I've known it for years, but he's also the face of this firm. He brings in the business. The board is loyal to him. Removing a sitting CEO, it's corporate civil war. It could tear the firm apart. The breach has already done that, I argued. The only question is whether you rebuild on a foundation of truth or on a foundation of lies. The latter won't last. Flores will present her findings in 5 days. That email, this video. The truth is coming out one way or another. You can either be the man who let it happen, or you can be the man who made it happen. He sank into his leather chair, the weight of his 70 years suddenly visible on his shoulders. What do you want, Jazz? A severance package? A recommendation? Your job back? I want you to do the right thing, I said simply. I want you to save the legacy you spent your life building. Richard is not the firm, you are. The partners who believe in integrity are. Lena is. Arthur is. That's the firm worth saving." He was silent for a long time, staring at the screen. "He tried to destroy you," he murmured. "That blog post, that was his work." "It was," I confirmed. "And yet you came to me, you didn't go to Flores, you didn't go to the press. Why?" It was a genuine question. He was trying to understand my endgame. "Because I still believe in this place," I said, and the truth of the words surprised even me. "Or at least in what it's supposed to be. I believe in the work we do when we're at our best. And because you are a man of honor, Elias. I gambled that you would put the firm's integrity above a misplaced sense of loyalty to a man who has none." That seemed to reach him. He looked up, and a flicker of the old, decisive leader returned to his eyes. "Maria Flores is presenting to the board on Friday. I am adding a new item to the agenda, immediately following her presentation. A vote of no confidence in the CEO." My breath caught in my throat. He was actually going to do it. "He'll fight it," I warned. "He'll have proxies. He'll call in every favor he's ever been owed." "Yes, he will," Elias agreed, "and he may very well win unless the board has all the information they need to make the correct choice." He tapped the tablet with the video. "This information. You'll show it to them?" "I will," he said, "and you will be there to present it." I was stunned. "Me, I'm on my way out, I have no standing." "You have more standing than anyone," he corrected. "You are the one who navigated this crisis. You are the one who uncovered the truth. And you are the one Richard tried to silence. Your testimony will be more powerful than any video. Be here, Friday, 10 a.m. sharp." As I left his office, I felt a seismic shift. The ground, which had been crumbling beneath my feet, was suddenly solid again. The game had changed one last time. It was no longer about Richard versus me. It was about the future of Sterling Vance. And the final move would be played out in the boardroom. The next few days were the quiet before the storm. I continued my work, coordinating the final details for my departure, handing off my projects. Richard and I moved through the office like ghosts, never speaking, never making eye contact. He knew something was happening. He could feel the change in the air, the sudden chill from board members who were usually his staunchest allies. On the morning of the board meeting, I dressed with particular care. I chose a simple, dark blue suit. It was a suit that projected competence and seriousness. It was armor. As I walked into the building, I saw Arthur Vance getting out of a cab. He looked nervous but resolute. We met at the elevators. "Elias told me what you did, Jazz," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, you saved my career, my reputation." "You did the right thing, Arthur," I said. "You told the truth, I just made sure someone was listening." We rode the elevator up in silence. When the doors opened on the top floor, the boardroom was already filling up. The partners, the board members, all the power players of the firm were there. Richard was at the head of the table, laughing with one of the partners, projecting an aura of complete control. When he saw me and Arthur walking together, his smile froze on his face. The laughter died in his throat. He finally understood. This wasn't a presentation. It was a coup, and I was leading the charge. The boardroom at Sterling Vance was designed to intimidate. A long, imposing table of dark, polished granite sat under a low-hanging, modernist chandelier. One wall was entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of the Capitol building, a constant reminder of the power wielded within these four walls. Today, the power felt concentrated, electric. I took a seat against the side wall, not at the main table. I was an observer, a witness, not yet a participant. Elias sat at the opposite end of the table from Richard, a quiet, gravitational center. Lena was next to him, her laptop open, her expression professionally placid. Arthur sat a few chairs down, looking pale but determined. The meeting began with mundane formalities, a deliberate calm before the storm. Then Elias cleared his throat. "The next item on the agenda is the preliminary report from Ms. Maria Flores regarding the security breach." Maria Flores was exactly as I remembered, sharp, composed, and radiating an aura of absolute integrity. She didn't present opinions, she presented facts, laying them out with cold, clinical precision. She detailed the sophistication of the attack, the extent of the data loss, and then she turned to the cause. "While the external attack was highly advanced," she began, her voice even, "our investigation has concluded that the breach was preventable. We uncovered multiple warnings from the firm's IT department to executive leadership regarding critical vulnerabilities. Specifically, we found a formal funding request for a firewall upgrade submitted 4 weeks prior to the breach by Mr. Arthur Vance." All eyes shifted to Arthur, who sat ramrod straight. Flores continued, "The request was denied by the CEO's office, citing budgetary constraints. It is the conclusion of our preliminary investigation that this decision constituted a severe lapse in judgment and a failure of the firm's duty of care to its clients." The air in the room grew thick. You could hear a pin drop. Richard, who had been leaning back in his chair with a look of feigned interest, was now sitting bolt upright. "That's a malicious interpretation," he interjected, his voice tight. "We field dozens of budget requests. Arthur's was one of many. We have to prioritize." "With respect, Mr. Sterling," Flores cut in, her tone leaving no room for argument, "this was not a standard request. It was flagged as a critical, time-sensitive security risk, a risk you were made aware of and which you personally chose to ignore." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "My full report will detail this further. Thank you." She gathered her papers and, with a nod to Elias, exited the room, leaving a crater of silence in her wake. The board members looked at each other, then at Richard. His carefully constructed facade was cracking. He was cornered. "This is a witch hunt," he blustered, his face turning red. "A disgruntled IT manager and an overzealous investigator are trying to make me the scapegoat for a criminal act. This firm is strong. I have led us through this crisis with transparency and—" Elias Vance held up a hand. The simple gesture had more authority than all of Richard's shouting. "That's enough, Richard." Elias' voice was low but carried to every corner of the room. "The board has seen Ms. Flores's report. We have all heard her conclusions, and now we have a decision to make about the future leadership of this firm. I have therefore called for a vote of no confidence in the CEO." Gasps rippled around the table. It was happening. Richard slammed his fist on the granite. "This is an ambush. You don't have the votes, Elias. The partners are with me." "Before we vote," Elias said, his voice as calm as a frozen lake, "there is one more piece of information the board needs to consider. Ms. Jasmine Carter, our former head of crisis communications, has a final presentation to make." Richard's head snapped in my direction, his eyes burning with pure hatred. "Her? She's a fired, disgraced employee with an axe to grind. She has no right to be here." "She is here at my invitation," Elias stated, his tone final. "Jazz, if you would." My legs felt steady as I walked to the head of the table and connected my tablet to the large monitor. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the board members, many of whom I had worked with for years. "Good morning," I began, my voice clear and strong. "Many of you know me. You know my work. You also know the narrative that has recently been circulated about my departure from this firm. Today, I am here to provide the context for that narrative." I didn't play the video immediately. First, I laid the groundwork. As part of my crisis strategy, I advocated for full transparency. Richard Sterling, as you saw, embraced that strategy publicly. Privately, however, he instructed me to obstruct the investigation. He ordered me to frame Arthur Vance and to build a false narrative around his alleged incompetence. Murmurs erupted. Richard was on his feet. "Lies, she's lying." When I refused, I continued, my voice rising slightly to be heard over him, he fired me. And when he learned that I had already resigned, he orchestrated a smear campaign to destroy my professional reputation. The question you have to ask yourselves is this: why would he go to such lengths? What was he so desperate to hide? I let the question hang in the air for a moment. Then, I pressed play. The video filled the screen. The voices of Arthur and Richard echoed through the silent, stunned boardroom. When Richard's dismissive line about choosing an Aspen retreat over the firm's security was spoken, a collective intake of breath was audible. The video was a confession. It was a character indictment. It was the end. When it finished, I turned off the monitor and looked directly at the board. The breach was a failure of technology. The cover-up, I said, my gaze finally landing on Richard, whose face was a mask of sheer disbelief, was a failure of leadership. The choice before you is not about one mistake. It's about the character of the man you want leading this firm. Thank you. I walked back to my seat, my job done. The rest was up to them. Elias Vance stood up. "We will now proceed with the vote," he announced. "All in favor of the motion of no confidence in CEO Richard Sterling, please raise your hands." One by one, hands went up around the table. Even Ben Carter, after a moment of panicked hesitation, slowly raised his. In the end, only 2 hands remained down, Richard's and that of his closest ally. The vote was overwhelmingly clear. Richard Sterling stared at the sea of hands, his face utterly blank with shock. He had been so certain of his power, so sure of his control, that he couldn't comprehend his own defeat. He looked from Elias to Lena to me. In his eyes, I saw not remorse, not anger, but the hollow emptiness of a king who had just been dethroned. Without another word, he pushed his chair back, turned, and walked out of the boardroom, leaving his career in ruins behind him. A wave of relief washed over the room, followed by the daunting uncertainty of what came next. Elias Vance, now the de facto leader, addressed the board. "This has been a difficult day, but a necessary one. We have a firm to rebuild, a reputation to restore. Our first order of business is to install an interim leadership team." He looked down the table, his gaze settling on Lena. "Lena, I'm asking you to step in as interim CEO. Your integrity and legal expertise are what we need right now." Lena looked shocked but nodded, a determined look on her face. Then Elias looked directly at me. "And we need someone to manage our strategy, to not only handle the fallout from this, but to redefine who we are to the public, to our clients, and to ourselves. Jazz, this firm needs you. Not as a liaison, not as a department head, as a leader." He turned to the board. "I propose we create a new C-suite position, Chief Strategy and Communications Officer, and I nominate Jasmine Carter for the role." The room was buzzing. This was more than just getting my job back. This was a seat at the table, the main table. Before the board could even discuss it, I spoke up. "Elias, Lena, I am honored, truly, but I have one condition." All eyes were on me again. "This can't just be about replacing one leader with another," I said. "This has to be a cultural reset. I want to build a new division, a strategy and ethics department with full autonomy and a direct line to the board. We don't just fix crises anymore, we prevent them. We build a culture of accountability from the ground up so that what happened with Richard can never, ever happen again." Elias Vance smiled for the first time that day. It was a genuine, hopeful smile. "That," he said, "is the best idea I've heard in 10 years. Is there a second to this nomination?" Hands shot up all around the room. It was unanimous. In the space of an hour, I had gone from a pariah to one of the most powerful people in the company. As the meeting adjourned, people came up to congratulate me, to shake my hand. The same people who had avoided my gaze just yesterday. Such is the nature of power in Washington, D.C., the last person to approach me was Lena. She put a hand on my shoulder. "That was quite a gambit, Jazz. You played the long game." "It was the only game I had," I said, a real smile finally breaking through. "Ready to get to work, Madam CEO?" She laughed, a sound of pure relief and excitement. "Absolutely, Madam CSCO, we have a firm to save. The ultimate revenge isn't watching your enemy fall, it's building something better on the ground where they stood." My return to Sterling Vance, now Sterling Vance Elias Group, was not a quiet affair. It was a declaration of a new era. With Elias' wisdom, Lena's legal precision, and my strategic vision, we didn't just patch the holes in the ship, we redesigned it from the keel up. My first act as Chief Strategy and Communications Officer was to go back to Arthur Vance. I didn't just give him his job back. I promoted him to Chief Technology Officer, gave him triple his previous budget, and a seat on the executive committee. His first project was to build the most secure, impenetrable data infrastructure in the private sector. It was a public promise we made to our clients, a tangible sign that things had fundamentally changed. My new department, the Office of Strategy and Ethics, became the firm's central nervous system. I recruited a diverse team of brilliant minds, lawyers, data scientists, communication experts, and even a philosopher specializing in corporate ethics. Our mandate was simple: to ask the hard questions before they became catastrophic problems. We wargamed every potential crisis, from political shifts to internal misconduct. We created a culture where the lowest-level analyst felt empowered to pull the emergency brake if they saw something wrong, without fear of retribution. We turned transparency from a crisis management tactic into a core business principle. We didn't lose the Thompson account. In fact, our handling of the crisis became a case study in corporate accountability. I flew out to meet with the senator personally. I didn't make excuses. I showed him the architectural diagrams for our new security systems, introduced him to our new CTO, and outlined the structural changes that made our firm more accountable than any of our competitors. He was a pragmatist. He saw that we were now a safer bet than the firms that hadn't yet had their trial by fire. He stayed, and where he stayed, others followed. The first few months were grueling but exhilarating. We were not just a law firm anymore. We were a testament to the idea that integrity could be a competitive advantage. We started winning clients not just for our expertise, but for our ethics. Young, brilliant talent, disillusioned with the cynical, win-at-all-costs culture of DC, began seeking us out. They wanted to work for a place that stood for something. About 6 months into my new role, I got a call from Marcus Thorne. Jasmine, he said, his voice laced with grudging admiration. I have to admit I didn't see that coming. You didn't just jump from a sinking ship. You took the helm and sailed it into a safe harbor. Well played. Thanks, Marcus, I said, smiling into the phone. We're building something special here. So I see, he said, which is why my offer no longer stands. Instead, I have a proposal. There's a major antitrust case coming down the pike. My firm has the litigation muscle, and you have the strategic high ground. What do you say we work it together? It was the ultimate sign that we had not just recovered, but prevailed. Our biggest rival wasn't trying to poach me anymore. They wanted to partner with me. 2 years after the breach, I was invited to speak at a Women in Leadership conference. My topic was turning crisis into catalyst. I stood on a stage in front of 1,000 bright, ambitious women, and I told them my story. I didn't mention Richard by name. I didn't need to. He had become a footnote in his own story, a cautionary tale whispered in the halls of power. He tried to land on his feet, but the stain of the scandal was indelible. No one in D.C. would touch him. Last I heard, he was consulting for some obscure firm overseas, his kingdom reduced to a cubicle. I talked about the difference between power and influence. Power is a title, a corner office. It can be given and it can be taken away. Influence, on the other hand, is earned. It's built on a foundation of integrity, expertise, and courage. It's the trust you inspire in others. It's what remains when the titles are gone. After my talk, a young woman approached me. She looked to be in her late 20s, her eyes shining with a familiar mix of anxiety and determination. Ms. Carter, she said, clutching a notebook. That was everything. I'm in a situation at my firm. My boss, he's taking credit for my work to cover up a mistake he made. I feel so trapped. I recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same look I'd had, standing in Richard's office, being told to lie. It was the look of someone who had been forced to choose between her career and her conscience. I took her hand. What's your name? Chloe, she whispered. Listen to me, Chloe, I said, my voice gentle but firm. Your silence is protecting the wrong person. It's protecting a system that is failing you. What they don't count on is your courage. They expect you to be quiet. They expect you to be afraid. Your greatest power is to defy that expectation. I gave her my personal card. Document everything, I told her. Create a paper trail. Find your allies, the people of integrity in your organization. And when you have your facts lined up, you don't make a threat. You make a choice. And you force them to make one, too. If you need someone to talk to, you call me. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of relief, of hope. In her, I saw myself. And I realized that the real victory wasn't my new title or my corner office. It was this. It was the ability to hold the door open for the women coming up behind me, to turn the hard-won lessons of my own battles into a roadmap for theirs. Success isn't the best revenge. Building a world where revenge is no longer necessary, that's the ultimate goal. It's creating a system where a person's value isn't something they have to fight for, but something that is self-evident. It's a long game, the longest game of all, and it's a game I was finally proud to be playing. As I looked out at the world from my office window, no longer seeing a battlefield, but a landscape of possibility, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that we were just getting started.